Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Steve Donovan, the Director of Alumni Relations at Trinity College. Thank you for joining us today for what promises to be another enjoyable and insightful conversation as part of our virtual Long Walk series of events with alumni, parents, faculty, staff, and students serving as guest speakers and panelists. The programs have all been recorded and can be found on the Alumni and Families website, or simply by Googling the virtual Long Walk. We're the only one. There you can watch archived recordings or download them as audio recordings from the college's SoundCloud account and take them with you on the road. We also want to acknowledge and thank Trinity's Women's Leadership Council today for their co-sponsorship of this program. We're proud that today's conversation includes a faculty member, an alumna, and a current student, all of whom had particular connections to Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And while it may seem ironic that today's event occurs while the process to confirm the next justice is in full swing as we speak, the timing is purely coincidental, as we had selected today's date before the confirmation schedule was determined. We simply wanted to remember the life of an icon and discuss her impact on our society. We hope you'll feel free to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen to ask questions of the panel. We'll ask some questions that you sent to us in advance, and then we'll try to get to as many live questions as possible. Now it's my pleasure to turn the program over to Professor Adrienne Renny Fulco, an associate professor at the college. Professor Fulco teaches a broad range of courses in public policy, constitutional law, and the Supreme Court. She also directs the undergraduate public policy and law program and coordinates the legal studies minor at Trinity. She is beloved by her students, and today we all get to be her students. Thank you, Renny.
Thank you, Steve, and I am delighted to welcome everybody who is able to join us today to this panel discussion. And I would just, I got my introduction, and I would like to introduce you also to our alum panelist, Youlan Xiu, who graduated in 2015 and double majored in public policy and law and English. And I would also like to introduce you to Thursday Williams, who is a member of the class of 2023. So again, thank you all for coming today and joining us in this conversation about the legacy, the transformative legacy of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. During the weeks following Justice Ginsburg's death, I have been thinking a lot about both her remarkable career and the way in which her ideas informed and shaped my own teaching career at Trinity. When I began teaching in the political science department at Trinity in the mid-1980s, there were no courses in our curriculum on women and the law. Indeed, although I taught constitutional law, the standard textbooks that we used did not include many cases pertaining to women's rights or sex discrimination. I was deeply interested in the work of feminist legal scholars and women's rights advocates, Ruth Bader Ginsburg in particular, who were challenging gender norms and litigating in the courts. I was determined to integrate the new case material into my course. As I was redesigning my course, I shared my ideas with a senior member of the political science department who also taught constitutional law classes. After explaining my plan for the course to my senior colleague, he immediately expressed his disapproval and admonished me for dedicating precious class time to topics that were not part of the traditional college constitutional law curriculum. His response was annoying, but he did not deter me from adding the new material to my course. I was fortunate that at the very moment I was reimagining the subject matter of my constitutional law class, Professor Joan Hedrick, now Professor Emerita, was in the process of creating a new women's studies major at the college. she generously invited me to contribute a course to the curriculum, and with her full support, I designed a new course called Law, Gender, and the Supreme Court, which appeared in both the political science and women's studies course listings. Soon afterwards, I developed another new course, Feminist Legal Theory, which provided me with the opportunity to teach students about the new trends in legal thinking that were animating activists and litigators who were advocating on behalf of women's rights. As is now well known, Justice Ginsburg was unable to receive a job offer from a law firm when she graduated from law school. Instead, she accepted a teaching job at Rutgers Law School and in fact co-authored an early textbook on sex discrimination that was used in law schools. At the same time, she co-founded the Women's Rights Project at the American Civil Liberties Union and soon became the organization's general counsel. In that role, she not only developed the project's sex discrimination litigation strategy, but she also argued 6 cases before the Supreme Court, winning 5 times. Justice Ginsburg's approach to these cases is noteworthy because she developed a methodical, targeted approach to litigating matters of sex discrimination. She understood that she was engaged in a 2-part task. First, she needed to carefully select cases that challenged laws that discriminated against men and women. And second, she recognized that her arguments must appeal to the male judges who would hear the cases. Justice Ginsburg personally experienced gender discrimination when she was denied the opportunity to practice law. And as a legal advocate, she realized that in order to succeed in court, she would need to demonstrate that laws that discriminated against women actually harmed both men and women. She sought to extend the concept of equal protection of the laws to a new category, gender. And in fact, it is for this reason that she often selected male plaintiffs and targeted laws that appeared to benefit women when in fact they only reinforced gender stereotypes. Her string of victories in the Supreme Court reshaped the doctrine of equal protection of the laws. And Justice Scalia stated, and this is a quote, that she was the leading litigator on behalf of women's rights, the Thurgood Marshall of that cause, so to speak. Justice Ginsburg's advocacy work ended when she was appointed first as a district court judge for the District of Columbia Court of Appeals, and then she was later, as we all know, appointed to the Supreme Court in 1993 by President Bill Clinton. And I think many of us are aware of her many remarkable contributions to the law, again, most notably reshaping and reframing the way we understand gender equality. And I would like to bring this back to my own experiences at Trinity. I have been so fortunate to teach about Ruth Bader Ginsburg over the years. And indeed, her work has become fully integrated into the courses that I teach. And I would like to close by just saying a couple of words about the aftermath since Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away. My email box has been flooded with emails from male and female alums of the college expressing their own gratitude, really, for having studied Ruth Bader Ginsburg and from having the opportunity to really understand the contributions she made. And in addition, they have told me that in their own work, in their own careers, studying Ruth Bader Ginsburg has been enormously important. And so I'm going to close here. Those are brief opening remarks. And I would now like to turn the program over to Youlan.
Thanks, Renny. I'm so grateful to be here with you and with Thursday as a guest of the college, discussing the legacy of a justice whose work and life I first studied as a student in your class, Law, Gender, and the Supreme Court. So I'll echo what you said, that it really is impossible to be a student of American constitutional jurisprudence, especially equal protection, without knowing about Justice Ginsburg's contributions to the law. I know that now because of you. So thank you for that. For me, the justice's legacy extends well past her role as a lawyer and a jurist. We've all seen the notorious RBG bobbleheads, figurines, t-shirts, and we know that she's become a cultural icon. In my view, this is because the justice represents larger ideals of hard work and determination in the face of discrimination and injustice. Like Renny said earlier, the justice graduated first in her class from Columbia Law in 1959, and not a single firm in New York offered her a position as a practicing lawyer. And Justice Ginsburg knew she wasn't alone in this. Just a few years earlier, Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, the first woman nominated to the U.S. Supreme Court, had graduated third in her class from Stanford Law, and only one law firm in all of California offered her a position as a legal secretary. And so, despite these indignities, Justice Ginsburg worked tirelessly to write the path for all of us, as a scholar, as an advocate, and later as a judge. She was famous for her capacity for hard work. In my view, having studied many of her opinions, it shows. All of her opinions are meticulously thoughtful, principled, and manicured. And there's a fun story that her clerks and friends tell, that if there was some time before the opening curtain of her beloved operas, Justice Ginsburg would pull out her papers and get a little bit more work in. And so if anybody embodies the ideal of hard work, it was Justice Ginsburg. I'll also say that Justice Ginsburg's legacy for me is a masterclass in how to deploy principled dissent. She was famous for saying that dissent speaks to a future age. When I was a senior at Trinity in 2015, I wrote my senior thesis on Justice Ginsburg's dissent in Ledbetter v. Goodyear. The plaintiff in that case, Ms. Ledbetter, was denied relief by the court because she failed to bring suit within 180 days of her employer's discriminatory act. But the problem with that kind of a rule is that Ms. Ledbetter, like many plaintiffs experiencing pay discrimination, had no idea that she was experiencing pay discrimination. In fact, a fun fact in the case is that she never would have found out had somebody not slipped an anonymous note into her locker at lunchtime that said that she was being paid a lot less than the men she supervised. In Justice Ginsburg's view, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was meant to protect civil rights, and reading that statute strictly just didn't do that. And so what I took from her dissent was that she wasn't complaining about an ideological defeat. She wrote for a future age and provided Congress with a blueprint for the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act of 2008. That is a perfect example, in my view, of how hard work, determination, and principled dissent transformed what's possible for a more equitable democracy. And I'll end on a personal note, that writing that paper also transformed what I thought was possible for myself. I was a first-generation college student, and like the justice, I am currently a first-generation law student. Until I came to Trinity and met Renny and the other professors and mentors I had never read a Supreme Court case, and the only lawyers I knew I saw on TV. And I chose to pursue law school because of my time at Trinity, and I have opportunities very different from the ones that the justice did not have because of the path that she blazed. I like to think, very humbly, that beginning with those nights in my thesis carrel in the Rather Library, overlooking the Robin L. Shepherd Field, that I continue to be a small part of the justice's legacy. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Thursday.
Hi, Youlan. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone that's here today. It is honestly an honor to be here talking about the legacy of such an iconic woman. So, hi, I'm Thursday. I am a public policy major. I'm actually taking Professor Fulco's class this year. So I met Justice Ginsburg on Broadway. So I performed in What the Constitution Means to Me about a year ago on Broadway, and I actually met Justice Sotomayor first, who told me that Justice Ginsburg wasn't going to be able to attend the show until the summer, but she did that to throw me off. So I thought I had more time to prep and, get my debating skills ready for the justice, because that's a high bar. And one night I was surprised. I went up there, I did my performance, I debated to keep the United States Constitution. And although there were a lot of Secret Service there, I thought it was another celebrity. And I got off stage and my company manager said, "So Justice Ginsburg is here." And I fell to the floor in tears. And I fell to the floor in tears because growing up, I always used to say it, and this was when I actually wanted to be a Supreme Court justice. Now that has changed. I want to be a politician. I used to say Justice Sotomayor came from the Bronx and Justice Ginsburg came from Brooklyn. So Justice Williams, which is me, will come from Queens. And for me to hear that Justice Ginsburg saw me perform, it took me one step closer to my dream. It was me knowing that, okay, well, this actually can happen. I can become I'll be the first Jamaican woman to be on the Supreme Court justice, to be on the Supreme Court. And so I met her, and she when I first saw her, she sat there and she said, "Justice Sotomayor and I have been talking about you." And the words couldn't come. But then she said to me, "I am very proud of you, and I would have argued to keep the Constitution as well." And she quoted Thurgood Marshall, and she said, "You know what he liked the most about the Constitution? He liked the fact that it could change over time." And for me, I used to argue to abolish the Constitution, but for me, it made me appreciate this document so much more. And then I met Justice Ginsburg again in Washington. We went to this party together, which was really fun. And then we met in chambers the next day. And I had the opportunity to ask her, what advice would she give a young African-American woman like myself who aspires to be like her? And I can't quote what she said, but I can tell you what I remember. She said that we have to learn how to essentially be diplomatic, right? How to be able to understand that as women and as African-American people, we're scrutinized much more than the typical American. And so we have to understand how to speak to where, people won't take it in a different way. And for me, that has changed the way how I deal with a lot of situations in my life today. But honestly, it is an honor to know that I had someone of such, come and see my show and tell me that she's proud of me and, say all these things about me, because honestly, I wouldn't have been able to walk on that stage and debate to keep the Constitution if it wasn't for Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And
thank you very much, Thursday. And Steve, I'm going to turn it over to you now for questions.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me back. Thursday, before I asked some questions, you shared some news with us, some exciting news with us last week about what the Constitution means to me. Would you like to share that with the audience?
Yes. Okay, so What the Constitution Means to Me will be airing on Amazon Prime this Friday, October 16th. So I encourage, especially, we're at a crucial point in history. I encourage everyone to watch it and to get involved. Yep.
Congratulations and thanks. Okay, a reminder to folks, feel free to use the Q&A functions to ask live questions. I'm going to start with a few questions that were submitted to us in advance. First, we'll start with what lessons can we learn from the Justice's time on the DC circuit, as well as her time founding and working on the ACLU Women's Rights Project?
Why don't I get started on that one? It's an interesting and important question. I think a word that is often associated with Justice Ginsburg is the word methodical. Meticulous is another word. But also, as Youlan said, diplomatic. And I think that what Justice Ginsburg was able to learn, both as an advocate and before she came onto the Supreme Court as a member of the DC Circuit, was in her role, and she understood her role as I think being an advocate for ideas that certainly had not yet been fully accepted in her role at the Women's Rights Project. And I think one of the things that we want to, that there's a consistency, is what I'm trying to say, about her role as an advocate and learning how to persuade people, learning how to do it in a diplomatic and polite way, and that she continued that same way of interacting with her colleagues and even her opponents in court when she ultimately went into court and then when she served on the bench. And I think that those are characteristics that she retained throughout her career. And I don't know, Youlan, would you like to add anything to that?
I'll just add, being a law student and being currently a law student in a Con Law 2 Civil Rights and Civil Liberties class, that I'm always blown away every time I read and reread the history of equal protection on the basis of sex and Justice Ginsburg's role at the ACLU, which was part of the question, I believe, beginning with Reed v. Reed, Frontiero v. Richardson, eventually Craig v. Boren. If we trace the history of the justice's role, she wrote amicus briefs for all of those cases, and she was responsible for a lot of the ideas that went into the petitioner's briefs. And so her role, long before she was on the court, was undeniable in the landscape of how we understand sex discrimination under the 14th Amendment. And of course, her iconic opinion in the VMI case really cemented where the current prudence sort of stands. And so that's all I really have to contribute. And it really has been for the justice's entire career that she's been an advocate in this way.
Thank you. I'll go to the next question. Justice Ginsburg was quite open about her respect and love for friend and colleague Justice Antonin Scalia. Despite their ideological differences, they forged a solid friendship. What might we learn about the judges from that relationship?
Yeah, Youlan, you start.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about this. I always thought that that was one of the most wonderful sort of pieces of lore from the Supreme Court. And it actually comes before the Supreme Court. Justice Ginsburg, when she sat on the DC Circuit, was great friends with Justice Scalia. And there is also a bit of rumor that when President Clinton was thinking about who to nominate for the US Supreme Court, that Justice Ginsburg, because of her close relationships with folks all across the spectrum, might not be the best liberal candidate for a liberal president. And we, of course, know that for the justice, differences in ideology doesn't take away from respect. And I think, in my view, that's exactly what we can learn from a relationship like that is you can absolutely find respect in dissent. And that's what I meant to say when I mentioned principled dissent. You disagree with the principles and find merit in your colleagues. And I'll just end by saying that another iconic professor at Trinity, the late Professor Ned Cabot, always used to say, you can't find your best argument until you understand your opponent's best argument. And perhaps what Justice Ginsburg and Justice Scalia's relationship teaches us is that you can't understand your opponent's best argument until you respect your opponent. And so, though they were ideological opposites, I think there's a lot to be said about finding respect in dissent.
Yeah, and I think that's wonderful, Youlan, and I would add to that it's not only that she was respectful, that they were respectful to one another in the final product, but they actually shared their opinions before they were published. And I think it's one of the interesting aspects of their relationship that the exchanges they would have, it picks up on exactly what Youlan was saying. It sharpened their own arguments because each of them was receiving criticism from probably their strongest opponent. And so I think that's that's something that Justice Ginsburg has talked about.
We have a couple of questions. I'll put them together on Justice Bader Ginsburg's Jewish heritage. The first from Trinity's own Lisa Cassow. Lisa, thank you for being with us today. Lisa says, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was beloved and revered in the Jewish community because of her commitment to the concept of tikkun olam, working to repair our broken world. Can you comment on how RBG's Jewish background influenced her moral compass? And then let me combine that with Brooke Scott in the audience today as well says, I've read a couple of books on RBG. I believe that her upbringing as a Jewish woman in a male-dominated religion was a significant factor to her beliefs in gender equality. Could you comment on the significance of her religious background to her life's work?
Probably, since I'm Jewish, I'll tackle this one first. I have been thinking a lot about this and about Justice Ginsburg's role, first of all, as the first female Jewish justice on the Supreme Court. And the reading I've done suggests to me that, first of all, Justice Ginsburg saw herself as an outsider, right? That her experience growing up in Brooklyn as a Jewish young woman, really influenced her. And that it was not only that she was an outsider, but she was a particular kind of outsider. She was a member of a minority group, and she understood what it meant for minorities to be protected. And she understood that in America, there was a great reverence, particularly among Jews, of the generation she grew up in, that the government had the power to protect minorities and in fact should do so. And I think that the moral values of Judaism contributed to her way of thinking about these important legal questions. And again, her own experiences, her family's experiences, I am sure shaped the way she began to develop concepts of equal protection. And again, I can't speak directly to her growing up in a male-dominated religion, but I can, my household was a little bit different. The males had to contend with the females probably a little bit more than in her generation. But what I do believe is that the moral values of Judaism were very consistent with the kinds of legal principles that she advocated for and cherished.
Thanks, Renny. Scott Wilson asks, well, first he says, hi, Renny. And then he asks, Do you use any books, if I can read this properly here, do you use any books for your law, gender, and Supreme Court class, or do you just read opinions? Which of her opinions do you admire the most?
Oh, Scott, first of all, I wish I could see you. So we'll have to Zoom another time together. I haven't talked to you in a long time, so welcome. And yes, I use a combination actually of textbooks and cases. My course has been, I've revised a little bit over the years. And in fact, I mentioned earlier, there didn't used to be textbooks, right, that really had all the cases when I first came to Trinity. There were a few law texts. In fact, Ginsburg wrote one of the first of the law texts. So I use a combination of readings on particular cases, on the evolution of, for example, the doctrine of equal protection. And then I also use a casebook in which we study the cases. So I think that's the first part of your question. And the second part was, Steve, can you remind me what?
I would, except I deleted it.
Oh, okay. Can I find it in the?
Renny, I think the question was asking what some of your favorite opinions are.
Yeah, the second part was my opinions, right? About which of the opinions, and they're one of the opinions that actually I think you spoke of both of them, Youlan. The first was certainly the VMI case, and that is the case where she wrote the majority opinion, which determined that the Virginia Military Academy could not accept female students because it violated the Equal Protection Clause, right? It was a violation, and that women, in fact, had to be admitted to the school. And she had a rigorous debate with her friend, Justice Scalia, who in that case was the dissenter and was not very happy with her opinion. And then, of course, I think her dissent in the Lilly Ledbetter case, which again, Youlan devoted a whole year to studying, was one of the most important opinions she ever wrote. And again, it was a dissenting opinion, but it actually was written in such a way, as Youlan said, that it was a blueprint for Congress to rewrite a defective law. And as a result of doing that, the kinds of equal pay protections that I think most of us believe should be in place are now in place, again, in that specific area that Youlan mentioned. And it was the first bill that Barack Obama signed when he became president. So I would mention those two cases.
Thank you. Chase Anderson asks, do you think Justice Sotomayor will step into more of a leadership role of the court's more liberal wing in Justice Ginsburg's absence?
Well, first of all, let me say hello to Chase, who was a phenomenal student at Trinity. I'm going to speak briefly about this, and then I'm going to see perhaps if Youlan has some thoughts on this as well. I think that she is the most likely candidate to take up that mantle on the liberal side. I think she is, in fact, probably more in tune with Justice Ginsburg's spirit than either of the other two justices on the court. And I think that she will fiercely defend the principles that Justice Ginsburg defended as well. Youlan, do you have any thoughts on that?
I have never found myself to disagree with Renny in my whole life. And so I'll say I agree. And I'll also say, and I believe I'm correct about this, but please, fact check me, that with regard to who signs on to whose opinions, I believe Justice Sotomayor and Justice Ginsburg, of course, in the time that Justice Sotomayor has been on the court, were the most sort of in common in terms of how they came out on certain cases and why they decided that way. So perhaps that is some evidence, at least, for the position that may be true.
And I would just add, maybe we can come back to Thursday here, since since the two justices were kind of working in coordination when she was meeting them. So maybe that's a hint of what's to come.
And let me pair this up too, Thursday, because if there wasn't necessarily a question there, someone in the audience is curious to know how your experience and what the Constitution means to me has impacted your academic pursuits and your intended career path.
Okay, can I answer that and this other question that's here about liberals being disappointed about Justice Ginsburg passing away during President Trump's tenure? And why do I think she resisted requests? So when I met her, I was like, hold on just a little bit longer. But it's, I think she knew what was going to happen. She saw that Mitch McConnell had blocked Merrick Garland's, President Obama's first nomination, right? And I think she knew that if she had stepped down, something like that would have happened. Like they would have pushed it and wait until Trump came in office or another president came in office, then they get to nominate another justice. But to the other question about my career path and what the Constitution means to me. So before I started the show, I wanted to be a public defender. I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to go to law school. I still want to go to law school, but I changed my career path. I want to be a politician now. I want to be the person that create the foundation for change in this country by changing laws. And what the Constitution means to me, and me having the opportunity to meet Senator Chuck Schumer and many different members of the House, gave me it opened my eyes up a lot. Like it showed me that, law makes changes. And yes, lawyers are amazing people, but politicians create the foundation for these laws. And honestly, I think I want to create the laws that change how things are done in this country.
Thanks, Thursday. Jamie Zoll asks, in a recent discussion thread for a group of lawyers who are mothers that she is a member of, one lawyer made the comment that the current climate of judicial confirmations, not just the fight over Judge Coney Barrett's nomination, but the efforts of the last 4 years to confirm such a high volume of judges at all levels, has shattered the legitimacy of the Supreme Court. Do you think Justice Ginsburg would agree? And do you agree?
First of all, hi, Jamie. So you got to start. This is your way. A little stumper here for the professor and other members of the panel. I think your observation is correct, that the effort to confirm judges over the past 4 years has been quite extraordinary. And I don't know if I would say that it necessarily undermines the legitimacy of the Supreme Court. But what I do think is that it raises questions about the role of the Senate and the principle of advice and consent that is supposed to guide the Senate when they review candidates. And I think, this will get us into a whole other conversation, which I'm happy to have perhaps at another time. So be in touch with me about it, Jamie. But I think what we're looking at is such a high degree of polarization, and the courts in general and the Supreme Court in particular, has become the locus of those polarized wars between the two parties. And I do think that if the public views the confirmation process is highly politicized and polarized, that in and of itself can contribute to the public believing that the legitimacy of the court is in question. And indeed, I think this is something that Justice Roberts himself has, alluded to.
Yeah, I certainly will not pretend to make any representations about what Justice Ginsburg might think. I don't feel qualified for that. In terms of, sort of the general climate of what people are thinking about the Supreme Court, its power and its legitimacy, it's certainly going to become but a much bigger problem if there continues to be such politicized confirmation hearings, which will continue to happen if politicians make it that way. And so that's really all I have to say about that. And it is a real concern. So I think Jamie makes a good point in that regard.
Thanks, Youlan. Caitlin Phelps asks, what are your thoughts on what people have characterized as RBG's missteps? For example, rulings on indigenous rights and criminal justice that progressives have criticized.
Youlan, do you have thoughts on that?
You know, in order to sort of respond, I think I would have to do some research, frankly, on those particular opinions, the grounds they were decided on, and the relevant law, which I know is an annoying and lawyerly answer to say I don't have all the facts. But the truth of the matter is that Justice Ginsburg, when she was on the DC Circuit and when she sat on the US Supreme Court, was not a political actor. And she, I believe, has said that many times. Her ideology and prudential principles guided her, and of course, her own sense of morality, but she wasn't a politician. And so to say that some of her opinions disagreed with a certain branch of politics, I don't believe is an indictment of her legacy or sort of her founding principles in her statutory and constitutional interpretation.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that, overall, we can distinguish between her advocacy and, the way we might understand that, where she was really breaking ground, right? And really transforming the way we think about concepts in the law, and her role as a justice. And I do think that there were some liberals who were frustrated with her because they felt that she didn't go far enough. But I think she viewed herself as somebody who was both moderate and conscientious, and felt that she, the way that she did her legal work required her to come up with the result that she believed was required by the law. And I would agree with you, Youlan. I don't think she saw herself so much as an advocate on the court, although I think there were certain cases where the principles that were validated were consistent with arguments she has made as an advocate.
Thank you. Greg Bader asks, or first he says, law, gender, and the Supreme Court remains my favorite class I ever took at Trinity. And thank you to Dr. Fulco for inspiring so many young people. I am deeply concerned about what a Justice Barrett replacing Justice Ginsburg will mean to civil rights for Americans who have come to rely on protections that have been established over the past few decades. How confident are you that future cases dealing with sex and gender discrimination coming before the Supreme Court will be decided in a way that continues to extend these protections?
Okay, first of all, Greg, you're bringing tears to my eyes, so I will hold them back as I speak. It is just so wonderful to know that you are out there somewhere and you are listening. And again, we should get in touch too. All of you who know me, get in touch. I'm going to be really honest. I share your deep concern about the fact that Justice Barrett likely will replace Justice Ginsburg, because I don't see any evidence in either her writings or her record today that suggests that she has the same commitment to the principles, particularly with respect to sex and gender discrimination, that Justice Ginsburg did. And indeed, I think it is going to be, a difficult time in the near future as we see how this now solidly conservative majority on the Supreme Court will actually decide cases, and whether or not the court will take the opportunity to perhaps turn the page, go backward, or if the court will continue to defend, right, its own decisions. And I think that's really, we don't know that yet, Greg. But I share your concern.
I'll just add that, Judge Barrett would not be an individual actor, of course. There are other justices on the court that she would have to convince in order to overturn sort of the landmark rulings that we all think about when we think about the sort of progressive rules that the court has come up with in the last couple of decades. And the only thing I'll add to what Renny said is that the Chief Justice Roberts, is actually a staunch defender of stare decisis and is, I think, a very principled disciple of that doctrine. And so if the court were to do something like invalidate Roe v. Wade, for example, it would be a very stark departure from the court's sort of tradition. And I'll also just say that back to, I believe, the point Jamie made about the court's legitimacy, in my view, the court undermining its own precedent for decades with regard to reproductive rights, for example, and equal protection, for example, would undermine the court's legitimacy if, with the tide change of political movements, an entire series of precedent might be thrown out. So that's my view.
Thanks. A colleague of mine, Ellen Hart, who also is a master's degree alum of Trinity College, says it feels like politics has radically infused the nomination process in the past few years. Has politics always played such a large role in Supreme Court nominations?
I think that in general, I mean, politics are always involved in Supreme Court nominations in the sense that presidents who are elected and are politicians nominate individuals to serve on the court. And the Senate, which also consists of individuals who are elected and are politicians, are the ones who make a determination about whether or not that nominee will be confirmed. So I think, it's always been political. I think the question is, what are the contours of the political environment? And I guess here I would go back to a comment I made a little bit earlier, Ellen. Great to have you ask a question. To a comment I made earlier about the polarization. And I think that the reason many of us are finding these hearings unsettling, and I wouldn't say just hearings that involved, nominees of Republicans. I think some people found hearings involving, nominees of Democratic presidents also unsettling in a certain way, is that they have become political in a different way and seem to be a proxy, in at least to some extent, for other disputes and questions, that are circulating in the political and very polarized environment.
Thanks, Renny. Thursday, this question is directed towards you from Deb Dulett. Thursday, love hearing about your aspirations. What would you want other college students to know, to think about, i.e., how can you help us inspire your peers to think critically about law and justice?
Oh my. That is a great question. What would I want my college students to think about? Well, first of all, I'm extremely happy that this event was, is for Trinity students as well, because I feel like, a lot of people aren't aware, a lot of students aren't aware of Justice Ginsburg's legacy. But how can I help inspire my peers to think critically about the law? I don't know. I think it's just put yourself in the law, right? So as an African American woman, right, it's like to think about not too long ago, certain rights weren't given to me. And if it wasn't because of this woman, like I wouldn't have had the right to sign a mortgage and have a bank account without a male co-signer, right? Like there's certain rights that I wouldn't have had as like me that I do have now because of this Supreme Court justice. So I think it would be like just to put yourself in the law. How do you fit in our society, in our law? And then think about what you can do to continue expanding these rights. So, right, Justice Ginsburg gave us this right, but then what else is left for us to do in this society? But yeah.
Thanks, Thursday. This question from Laura Lockwood, another colleague of mine, is also aimed at Thursday and Youlan. What event or events or who inspired you to follow the legal profession and specifically the area of gender discrimination? And what do you think Ruth Bader Ginsburg's reaction to Judge Coney Barrett's predicted ascendance to the Supreme Court would be?
Youlan, can I take the first question? You take the second one?
Sure, go for it.
So who inspired me? So I was a part of the legal outreach program where I debated at NYU Law School and Brooklyn Law School for a little while. That was my first exposure to like case precedents and, you know, reading all the piles of cases. And that's what inspired me to follow the legal profession. I learned that law isn't what you see on television. And it's actually, in my opinion, it's much better how we do it. But that's the legal outreach program, and all the things that I had to do within that program is what inspired me. And going back to what I said when I first started, I always used to say Justice Sotomayor came from the Bronx, Justice Ginsburg came from Brooklyn, so you know Justice Williams is gonna come from Queens. So that's what also kept me going. And then, you know, meeting these two Supreme Court justices and hearing that they were having conversations about me just made like everything even brighter.
I'll take that question in reverse and say that I really do believe that Justice Ginsburg would not have expressed any opinion about the confirmation because it's quite simply not the court's role. And so that's sort of my simple answer to that second half of the question. The first half is a much more fun answer. You know, it'll be a surprise to nobody here if you heard my opening remarks that Professor Fulco is one of the people in my life who, without whom I quite simply wouldn't be where I am and would not have made the choices that I've made. And so that's a huge feather in Trinity's cap, in my view. And of course, Justice Ginsburg, who, when I was 21, I believe, I snuck into a Duke Law event to go see, pretending to be a Duke student. And I had done some reading leading up to the event. And one of the things that Justice Ginsburg had most recently said at the time was, you know, I go to all these law school events and only the male students ask me questions. Where are all the female students? Why aren't they asking me questions? And so I was sitting just a few rows back in a pretty intimate event with the justice, and she spoke about her role on the court, her cases, her sort of life and work. And when it came to the Q&A, she was entirely correct. Only the male students asked her questions. And I just couldn't bear the idea of letting Renny down, of letting the justice down by not asking a question. So before I knew it, my hand shot into the air, and they were bringing me a wireless mic, and I had no idea what I was going to ask. And I asked her, what do you think the next big frontier or the remaining fight for women's liberation is? And the justice is famous sort of for her patience for silence. And so she took a big, long pause in which I thought, what a silly question to ask one of the most impressive women of all time. And then she slowly said, if we pick one, then we'll miss something. It has to be all of it. And so the answer to your question is my mentors at Trinity, namely Professor Fulco and Professor Cabot, and of course, Justice Ginsburg.
Thanks. Let me, maybe we'll let this be the last question or combination of them as we get close to the 1 o'clock hour here. Rand Barton, who said to say hello, Renny, says he'd love to hear the panelists speak about their thoughts in the current effort to fill RBG's seat before the election. And then Brendan Way, along similar lines perhaps, first he says, hi Renny, where can we find your current syllabus? And then two, Brendan asks, what do you think is going to be the Democrats' next move after Amy Coney Barrett's confirmation?
Okay, I will say, let me start with the second question. I think there's very little that the Democrats can actually do, at this point with respect to the court. And I suspect that what the Democrats are going to be doing is trying to flip the Senate. I think that that's really what it is that they need to do going forward. And again, remind me of the first part again.
Rand asked to hear the panelists speak about their thoughts in the current effort to fill RBG's seat before the election.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest here. I think it was a little unseemly that I'm just going to say this, and people are free to get in touch with me and disagree with me. That's what this is all about. I think, she had not yet been buried when the nomination was actually put forward. And I just found that not for reasons of political ideology, but for reasons of respect, that here you had a woman who devoted her life to the law, who changed it dramatically, who transformed the way we think about gender equality in this country. And I just found the rush to nominate somebody new when she had not even yet been buried, to be really unseemly and so at odds with the way the justice conducted herself in her life as a private citizen, as an advocate, and as a judge and justice.
Thanks. Maybe we'll let that be the end of the formal questions. There are several more. I'm sorry we can't get to them all, although we are able to record those questions, and we'll try with our panelists to perhaps respond to as many of those privately as we can after the event is over. Perhaps I could thank the panelists and ask if each of you had any closing thoughts or things you wanted to either share with the audience or share with each other before we sign off today.
I'm going to give another shout out to Joan Hedrick for making it possible for me to teach all these wonderful students all over for these many years and introduce them to Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So I feel that that's an important part of what I have given to Trinity, and I would not have been able to do that without Professor Hedrick.
There's been a lot of conversation in the news lately, especially with remote learning, about the value of higher education and specifically with respect to its dollar value. And in my view, my time at Trinity was invaluable for all of the reasons that I hope are obvious today, because of what I learned, because of the relationships I made. And so I'm very grateful to be a part of this event. Thank you very much for having me. And my parting words are that we've talked a lot about how the political process affects the law, and the only way for us to engage with our democracy fully is to vote. And so I would encourage everyone to exercise their voting rights to the fullest extent that they can.
So I first want to echo Youlan. Yes, vote. I actually have something on my wall that says a woman living here has registered to vote, thereby assuming responsibility of citizenship. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing on my wall. So vote. The second thing is what the Constitution means to me is on Amazon Prime this Friday. Please, please, please watch it. You're not going to be disappointed. Bring tissues and watch it. And my third thing is I want to thank everyone that put this event together. I really wanted to do something to honor RBG because she's such a trailblazer, right? So I just want to thank everybody that put this together. Thank you for inviting me to speak. Yeah, so thank you.
Let me offer my thanks to all three of you and to the entire audience. It makes us feel proud of Trinity for sure. And I think Thursday showed us the poster behind her, but I think we should perhaps close by letting her show us her t-shirt today, which we don't have a full view of yet. So
yes. So my shirt says her rest is earned. It is our turn to fight. And I think, oh, and another thing I wanted to say is hope, right? There's a lot happening right now in our country, and it can be very discouraging. I know I'm sitting here trying not to read the news too much, but just know that there are young people out there like myself who are very passionate about this country and about the laws and about our government, who are willing to, to take the torch from RBG and continue this fight.
Steve, can I say one more thing?
certainly.
I just do want to also echo what Thursday said, and I know Youlan agrees with me. We are so grateful to you, Steve, and to everybody who was helpful in putting this together. And I want to also thank Melissa, for actually contacting me and making sure we could do something that would be meaningful and important. And this is what makes Trinity Trinity. So thank you very, very much.
Yes, thank you all. A special thank you to Melissa Bronzino Regan from the class of '87 and a member of the Alumni Relations staff. Thanks to everybody once again, and stay safe and well, and take care.
Thank you, Steve.